Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Thanks so much for being here. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. We're almost, 3 weeks into the Donald Trump, Elon Musk presidency. It's going, it's pretty interesting so far as they dismantle the agencies they don't like. USAID, now they're going after the Consumer Protection Bureau. One of the good things, like the few good things that the Obama administration did in the response to the financial crisis in 2008, was creating this consumer bureau that has returned a lot of money to consumers from banks. And now Elon Musk tweeted the other day, CFRB RIP, and now it's
Right.
done. It's done.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Which obviously is a great thing if you care about the people and corruption. I mean, I'm being obviously sarcastic, but it is just an example of how all these people who are claiming this always happens. Like the right wing always claims that the government is corrupt, but oligarchs are not. Like they just want to shift things from public to private.
Yeah, and they're so brazen that Elon Musk can just tweet something like "Goodbye, government
I
agency"
know,
that
he's such a child,
staffs
man
a lot of
child.
people. That is like, that costs very little money. I mean, what's the budget for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Not very high.
Right.
And all of a sudden, Elon Musk decides it can be shut down, and so now it's gone with no public debate. There have been some court decisions that have frozen some of these shutdowns, but this is unprecedented. I mean, we've always been ruled by oligarchs, but one oligarch in particular choosing what to slash and cut is pretty unique, and we'll be talking a lot about that on today's show.
Right. Yeah. And also really do want to encourage people to watch or listen to last week's episode with Brian Berladek, because I think he does a great job debunking a lot of the mythology around USAID. So make sure you listen to that. And he's a former Marine, and so he's really fascinating perspective.
All right, let's turn to Meet the Depressed.
Good Sunday morning. We begin with President Trump's historic overhaul of the federal government that is proceeding at an unprecedented pace and scale. The president has tasked Elon Musk, the world's richest man, with carrying out his mission. And now Musk and his team of young tech engineers have inserted themselves into at least 17 federal agencies, according to the New York Times, accessing sensitive federal data like Social Security numbers and bank accounts for millions of Americans. On Friday, President Trump defended Musk's role.
Is there anything you've told Elon Musk he cannot touch?
Well, we haven't discussed that much. I'll tell him to go here, go there. He does it. He's got a very capable group of people.
I love that. He tells him to go here, to go there. He does it. I mean, he sounds a little bit like a puppet. If I were Elon, I wouldn't appreciate that summary.
Very capable. They know what they're doing.
Now, President Trump says he has directed Musk to turn his sights toward the Pentagon. The Defense Department has billions of dollars in contracts with Musk through SpaceX and his other companies.
You said there's some areas where you wouldn't let him work because he has conflicts of interest.
If there was no, I haven't seen that. And he would know not to do it. So we haven't had that yet. But if there was a conflict, we would let him work in that area.
The president.
Oh, okay. Well, then end of story. Then nothing to worry about here. It's yes, this giant Pentagon contractor is now in charge, been given the authority to just slash entire government programs, including possibly at the Pentagon where he has contracts, but no conflict of interest there at all. I'm sure, for example, if he sees wasteful spending in all the contracts that he gets from the Pentagon, I'm sure he'll just cut that because he's so objective and independent. I mean, this whole thing is real. I mean, did people vote for Elon Musk? I mean, Democrats make this point. It's a fair one. Like, did he run for office? No. Yes, it's true. They promised Doge on the campaign trail, so it's not a complete surprise. But this idea that he can go and like just unilaterally decide what to cut and what not to. And we'll see, is he actually going to cut the most wasteful agency there is, which can't even pass multiple audits, which spends like hundreds of millions of dollars just to conduct an audit that it can't even ultimately pass in the end? Is Elon Musk seriously going to go after the Pentagon?
I know the idea that
Highly doubt that.
well, actually, Aaron, he is, because we know that because Trump just told us that.
Yes, with no conflicts of interest, totally objectively, clear-eyed. Yeah, well, that's going to be interesting.
Its agenda is facing serious challenges in the courts, with more than 24 lawsuits to date. Federal judges temporarily blocking Musk's team from accessing those sensitive Treasury Department records, pausing the Trump administration's buyout offer for federal workers, and for now blocking a plan that would have put thousands of USAID workers on administrative leave. The agency largely focuses on disease prevention, disaster relief.
One other thing, by the way, so there's a conflict of interest when it comes to the Pentagon, right? Which obviously he's in bed with. But the opposite thing is going to happen too. There's going to be a conflict of interest with his access to like the Labor Department data because and funding, because OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has in a 5-year period fined Tesla like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I'm sure he's going to be doing things that have a conflict of interest when he deals with the Labor Department, like maybe shut it down.
Relief and food programs in famine-stricken areas. First Lady Melania Trump praised the agency during her husband's first term.
We want to show the world that we care, and I partnered and I'm working with USAID.
Also this week, President Trump stunned world leaders by floating in a...
Well, you know what? Maybe that's what they have in common, Trump and Melania, you know? Like they both flip-flop. Maybe that's like one of the things that they like to do.
Yeah,
like
she doesn't seem to.
Long walks on the beach, flip-flopping on policy.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to enjoy like kissing him. They always have these awkward kisses in public. So maybe that's what they come together, is just flip-flopping on. For example, you know, at one point caring or claiming to care about feeding people, and now no longer caring about that whatsoever. But I do have to say though, I don't want to minimize the suffering that will come from the USAID closure, because vulnerable people will be hurt by this. You know, HIV programs in Africa, for example. I mean, whatever you think of USAID, it does do some good around the world, and people who are vulnerable will suffer from it being dismantled or severely curtailed. But at the same time, for example, on food aid, I will stand corrected if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. USAID spends about as much as it does on food aid, a little bit more on food aid than it does on so-called democracy promotion, which means generally destabilizing countries that we want to control that aren't under U.S. control. So if you're an agency, an aid agency, and you're spending just a little bit more on food aid than you're spending on so-called democracy programs that ultimately don't even spread democracy, they in fact undermine it. For example, in Ukraine, supporting people who overthrew an elected government, then your priorities are not on the level, and you do deserve scrutiny. Unfortunately, I don't trust Elon Musk and Donald Trump to really go after the very damaging parts of USAID. They're focusing on so-called woke stuff,
Exactly.
which is very low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Not the major, as far as I understand, the major programs that have destabilized countries, like in Ukraine, which we'll talk about more later on in the show. But
yeah, there's no question that their priorities are not up to snuff. The question is, do they do good, and what is the good that they do, and is it really responsible to cancel that stuff?
It's not responsible to cancel the stuff that is good. I say cancel the stuff, like, for example, cancel programs that fund people who overthrow governments we don't like. I'm all for that. I don't think we need to be, and certainly if you're going to do that, at least don't call it aid. At least like don't use an aid agency like USAID as a slush fund to overthrow governments. At least be honest about it and run it through the CIA.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's another thing. Like, they have to do good, right, Aaron, in order for this kind of whitewashing of what they're doing. Like, in other words, they have to cover up the regime change stuff that they're funding with good stuff, or else it would be too transparent.
Well, speaking of transparent, let's hear about Donald Trump's, you know, he's sticking to his plans to ethnically cleanse and then own, in his words, Gaza.
American takeover of Gaza.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too.
You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there? Redevelopment?
I do see a long-term.
So I just want to say that that's good that this journalist, who I believe is from NBC or MSNBC, she's like a very mainstream journalist. That's good that she's calling out Trump's the illegality of what he's doing. She's acknowledging the sovereignty of Gaza. But why wasn't she doing that when Joe Biden was funding genocide and breaking all these international laws? Like, all these people all of a sudden discover empathy for Palestinians, or discover that they care about the rule of law or international humanitarian law.
Yeah, and as cable news bookers, they also discover that Palestinians exist. So you will see now on CNN a lot more Palestinians coming on to criticize the president than were doing so when Joe Biden was the president. When Biden was president, a couple of MSNBC shows like Ali Belsh's show and Ayman Mohaldin, they had on Palestinians, but the rest of them generally ignored them. But now that Donald Trump's the president, you'll see a lot more Palestinians on TV.
Right. Just like they held that 60 Minutes special, right? Which exposed all the ways that they were violating laws. They couldn't release that until after Kamala had lost.
That's right. 60 Minutes did a really good story featuring all these State Department whistleblowers, all the people who resigned from their positions in protest of the genocide, documenting how U.S. bombs have destroyed Gaza, killed people. They had really powerful footage of that. And they held it until after Kamala Harris had lost. And then they were like on Biden's way out the door, they finally released this expose of all his support for war crimes inside Gaza when the damage was long done.
Ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece.
Miriam Adelson loves the idea.
Yeah.
Alan Dershowitz loves the idea.
Yeah.
Jews across from New York to Florida, like wealthy Zionist Jews, love the idea. So hey, everyone's on board.
Jews like us, though, hate the idea.
Well, he didn't speak to us.
Right. I know.
Piece of land.
President Trump's words prompting swift condemnation from Arab nations like Egypt and Jordan, and raising doubts even among some Republicans.
I'm not supportive of having the American people paid.
I was like, oh my God, he's not supportive of this, of Donald Trump owning Gaza. Wow, listen to that and listen to his reasoning.
Rebuild Gaza. I don't think that's our responsibility.
Probably need some clarification on what exactly that means. He's a developer of resorts. I think he sees a good opportunity. But we need to, obviously Gaza's not ours. It's sovereign. It's part of another country.
Well, I mean, but who's he referring to there? Is he saying it's a part of Israel? Because
Yeah, exactly.
that's like just as offensive as Trump's call for the U.S. to own Gaza, because
Right.
neither Israel or the U.S. have a right to a single inch of Gaza. But of course, that thought can't permeate the minds of U.S. politicians. It just doesn't register. And that's the problem here. What Trump said is so crude and offensive, and it should be dismissed. But the outrage over it obscures the ongoing outrage of Israel continuing to occupy Gaza after destroying it. And what Trump is basically saying to Palestinians is like, you have no future there. Whether we own it or not, you have no future there. And then he wants them to leave and not return. And he's endorsing the most hardline Israeli vision there is. Like, there's some Israelis who will say at least like, that we shouldn't go and expel everybody in Gaza. But Trump is taking the most extreme hard right Israeli line possible, that Palestinians in there should leave. And that's just part of a long-term Zionist project, ethnically cleanse Palestinians. It began with Israel's founding, and Trump is on board now officially with the most extreme element of it.
Yeah. And just pushing back a little bit on what Kennedy just said, we do have a responsibility to rebuild Gaza. We are the ones who funded and facilitated the genocide there, the devastation there. Israel would not have been able to destroy it without our help. So of course they deserve the financial support of the United States.
Absolutely. There
rebuilding.
should be reparations.
Yes.
Reparations paid to Palestinians, not just for the genocide, but for decades of occupation and displacement. People, the majority of the population in Gaza are refugees. They come from places inside what is now Israel, and Israel has stolen their homes, their ancestral homes. They deserve, if Israel is going to insist on never letting them return to their homes, which they have the right to do, then where's the offer of compensation and the apology? It never happens. And Trump is now advancing that agenda by saying that they should leave Gaza. They can't even stay there.
Right. It's so funny. Some of Trump's defenders online, I've seen this, are like, he's not ethnically cleansing. He's giving them nicer places to live. It's like, I don't think you understand the definition of ethnically cleanse. When you make people leave where they are, that's ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, I've also seen people saying he's playing like 3D chess, like with Netanyahu. He's putting pressure on Netanyahu with this outlandish idea. He's saying that, like, if you don't solve the Gaza problem, then we're going to come in and clean it up. It's like, no, he's just endorsing Netanyahu's wildest dreams of expelling as many people as possible. That's what he's doing.
And also, the other thing that's really frustrating about the kind of awakening of people's consciousness is, you know, there are tons of libs who reacted to the news about Gaza and his plans to own it by saying really offensive things like, you know, I hope you guys are happy now, Dearborn, Michigan people, or good thing we got rid of Genocide Joe. It's like, wait, it's not like things were good under Biden. It's not like an ongoing genocide was okay. I'm not defending Trump's plans, but it's not worse than what Biden was doing. It's crude. I mean, it's more crude the way he's framing it, but an ongoing genocide is worse, I think, than his plans.
Yeah, an ongoing genocide is exponentially worse than the president saying some really offensive things.
Yeah.
That's a given. But again, people whose political outlook is framed entirely by what Trump says out loud can't process that because they have, you know, what's called Trump derangement syndrome. Okay, let's turn to Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, responding to the backlash over Trump's plan to own and ethnically cleanse Gaza.
A fair amount more to get to. Let's go to Gaza now. President Trump suggesting the U.S. would take over Gaza. And then he walked back saying U.S. troops are not going to be on the ground. Let me ask you, Colonel, what is the White House's plan for who will control Gaza once the war is over?
Well, right now, the IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces have had to go in and will continue to destroy Hamas if they do not honor the terms of this ceasefire. So that's point one. Point two, President Trump looks at this in very practical terms in the sense of, are we going to repeat the definition?
By the way, that is where a responsible journalist would say, well, actually, it's Israel who has violated the terms of the ceasefire. Yeah, I mean, he's predicting that Hamas may violate it, but why aren't they calling out the fact that Israel has already done that?
Of insanity here and pour billions in, rebuild, and just have another October 7th again and another war years from now. Let's look at the reality of having 1.8 million people sitting in piles of rubble with no sewage, with unexploded ordnance, and he's asking in a humane way, what is going to happen to these people? And everyone around the region says their heart breaks for the Palestinians, rightly so. But then come to the table with your plan if you don't like his plan. And interestingly, we are seeing all kinds of outreach since the president made that statement of saying, let's help you take this on. And so those conversations are ongoing right now.
No, that's not what you're hearing. Or at least that's not what you're hearing from the region. The region is just reiterating what they've offered Israel for decades. And this is what Mike Waltz and corporate media totally ignores. Nobody will ever bring up the fact that there's been an offer on the table to Israel for decades now. It's called the Arab Peace Initiative. We talk about it a lot, but it's important to stress it because it's censored on corporate TV. And it basically is the international consensus of Palestinians getting a tiny sliver of land, just 22% of their historic homeland in the West Bank and Gaza, as a state. That means Israel ending its occupation that has been going on in different forms since 1948. First, when they expelled Palestinians, stole their land. Then 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. It's saying Israel finally end one of the longest running military occupations in the world and give Palestinians a state in just 22% of their historic homeland and have a just resolution to the refugee issue, which means that if you won't let Palestinians come back to their homes that were stolen from them in 1948, give them compensation and apologize for what they've gone through. That's the deal on the table. Everybody endorses it. All the Arab states, Iran endorses it. Hamas at different times has said that they would accept it. Hezbollah has said that they would that they wouldn't endorse it, but they wouldn't stand in the way. The whole world votes every single year along those lines at the UN General Assembly. That's the offer on the table. But the bipartisan consensus is, which Mike Waltz represents now because he's in power, is that no, they're not going to give Palestinians even a minimal acceptance of the right to self-determination in just 22% of their homeland. They're not even, the U.S. and Israel won't even accept a Palestinian compromise, a Palestinian surrender, basically, because they want to give Israel the impunity to steal as much Palestinian land as they want and deny Palestinians the right to self-determination, because part of the reason is they don't want to acknowledge that Palestinians have rights, because the whole premise of Israel, it's founded on ethnic cleansing. And when you acknowledge that Palestinians actually are a people with rights, you're sort of calling into question the idea of Israel and Zionism to begin with. So for them, it's a non-starter. And everybody goes along with this notion that there's no other solutions when it's been there on the table.
Right. And it is really disgusting. I mean, the fact that they're not mentioning when he brings up Hamas breaking the ceasefire, this is where, again, it's relevant to mention that Israel has broken the ceasefire. It always breaks the ceasefire. And, you know, Euromed, according to Euromed, which is a great organization, 110 Palestinians have been killed by Israel since the ceasefire, which is 6 people a day. Can you imagine if 6 Israelis a day were killed by Hamas? Do you think they'd mention that?
Okay, so having conversations with other world leaders about potentially being a part of that post-construction effort once the world war is over. Let me ask you this: does the U.S.
But the key piece is you can't get to post-construction. You can't make this the Paris of the Mediterranean like Beirut was back in the 70s and give these people a better life if you've got 1.8 million people living in absolute squalor in mountains and mountains and mountains of debris. It's just President Trump is a builder. He's a deal maker in chief. And he understands that this is it just doesn't make sense. So for anyone, the media included, that doesn't like what he is proposing, come to us with a better plan.
Well, that's why the media will never do that, because the media is ultimately on board with this agenda of ethnic cleansing and displacement and denial of self-determination. If they were, they would say, how about you give Palestinians the right to self-determination? How about you accept the Palestinian compromise that they've accepted, their leadership has accepted, of just 22% of their homeland, and get out of Gaza, get out of the West Bank, remove all the illegal settlements in the West Bank that make Palestinian life impossible, end the blockade. He's talking about all this misery as if it's some like act of God, some natural disaster. Even before the genocide, it was deliberately created by a joint U.S.-Israeli blockade that denied Palestinians in Gaza of all the basics they need for life. Like the power plants were barely working, water facilities were barely working. That was even before the genocide. And that was a deliberate policy by Israel to make it impossible for Palestinians in Gaza to live.
Yeah, and these people, you know, a lot of people are offended by what Trump is saying more than by the actions. Like, you're not supposed to say that stuff out loud. The ownership part. You're supposed to do it subtly.
Okay, let's hear now from an ally of Donald Trump's, Congressmember Mike Turner.
I want to turn to Gaza and Israel. We saw those images of the 3 hostages that were released this weekend looking terribly gaunt, having Hamas fighters next to them. Will that make any difference, do you think, with the ceasefire going forward? But I also want to talk to you about President Trump's pledge to take over Gaza.
So before we get to that, it's interesting that she brought up how gaunt these hostages are, the Israeli hostages are. I don't remember her ever talking about the starving and starved Palestinian hostages. Has she ever mentioned that? And they are a really significant difference is that Israel has food. They have unlimited food, right? The Palestinians don't, because they have been cut off from food and humanitarian aid. And in fact, there are these really disturbing videos of settlers literally blocking humanitarian aid from coming in, attacking. Yeah, so here's some trucks carrying food aid that were on their way to Gaza, and you can see what the settlers did to it. They also beat up truck drivers. So the fact that that the hostages, the Israeli hostages, were still given food at all is pretty impressive. And there's no excuse for the gaunt, skinny state in which, look at this person, right? So here's a prisoner, a Palestinian. You can see the change there. And it would be really great if Martha Raddatz even pretended to care about this.
It's a great example of just how Palestinian lives to corporate media, to establishment politicians just don't matter. They don't register. So someone could look just as gaunt and
more gaunt,
and ill as an Israeli prisoner, but because they're Palestinian, they just don't count. And Trump had a comment about how the Israeli prisoners look like they've survived the Holocaust. Well, that's because Israel's inflicting the Holocaust of our time. When you turn Gaza into a death camp, you bomb it constantly and deprive it of aid. That's what people are going to look like.
Right.
And it's a great point. Israel cannot claim the same excuse because they have all the food in the world.
Right.
All right. Let's hear from them.
They also, like, there was a girl who snuck her little adorable Shih Tzu Bella into the tunnels, and the fact that not only did she survive, but her dog survived. Not just saying that because I'm pro dog, obviously. I'm just pointing out that there's a humanitarian concern that we don't see by the IDF.
She really doubled down on this week.
One thing that this has done is it certainly has exposed the issue that the two-state solution isn't a plan and isn't a proposal. It's a slogan, because no one came forward and said this is disruptive or provocative to our two-state solution. I mean, there's no one who's the leader of it. There's no structure for it. There's no one who's working on the governance structure for West Bank.
But do President?
See, this is where these people are so cynical. First of all, it's not true. Saudi Arabia responded to Trump's ethnic cleansing proposal and said, we will not accept this and we won't normalize with Israel. They reiterated what they said 1 million times. We won't normalize with Israel until there's a Palestinian state.
Right.
So that's the response from Saudi Arabia and pretty much everybody else in the region. And Mike Turner wants to pretend that that's not happening because so now they're like saying, oh, the two-state solution, it's not feasible. Yeah, because you refuse to allow it. Everybody else supports it. The UN General Assembly votes every single year in favor of it. And yes, like Hamas, some people in Hamas have said we'll never accept it, but others have. And the point is, if the U.S. ever cared about it, which the U.S. claimed to care, the U.S. claimed to support a two-state solution, they would have actually engaged with Hamas and tried to negotiate something rather than giving Israel impunity to destroy the prospect of a Palestinian state. And again, I'm not saying that the idea of a Palestinian state is a just idea. It's profoundly unfair. It legitimizes the theft of the Palestinians' ancestral homeland. It's profoundly unjust. It also happens to be, though, the global consensus when it comes to the solution, and it has support among the Arab states, and it's what's on the table, and it's what Israel and the U.S. have refused to allow. So now Mike Turner wants to pretend that it's not a solution when the only obstacle to it has been U.S.-Israeli obstruction.
Right, and now we have Israel saying out loud that they can't do a two-state solution, which is it's interesting that he doesn't mention that. He makes it seem like it's just like kind of like we said before, a natural disaster or something that is just a state of being, as opposed to Israel saying that part out loud.
Even Ismail Haniyeh, after October 7th, said that we want to have negotiations for a Palestinian state.
Right.
And you can argue to Hamas, well, if you wanted that, then October 7th did not advance that goal. That's a strategic criticism, but you can't say that there's not a solution on the table and that it's impossible when everybody except for the U.S. and Israel supports it.
Right.
And what they want and he's talking about the lack of governance in the West Bank. That's because the U.S. has installed, or U.S. and Israel propped up a client collaborationist Palestinian Authority that they've bought off to do their bidding and to not stand up for Palestinian rights and to even help take part in crackdowns on Palestinian protesters, as we've seen recently. So this idea that there's not governance for Palestinians in the West Bank, that's because U.S. and Israel have made sure that there's no governance, and they've made sure to divide Gaza from the West Bank to keep the Palestinian factions united, to the point where even when Hamas, one of their key demands was they wanted the release of Marwan Barghouti, who is a Palestinian leader not from Hamas, but he's recognized as someone. He's recognized as someone who could actually unite the Palestinian factions, and Israel doesn't want that because they don't want to face a unified Palestinian struggle. They don't want to face someone who actually advocates nonviolence because they see him as effective, and they don't want an effective Palestinian leader. Exactly what Mike Turner is pretending doesn't exist.
Trump's comments help?
I think it does pose the challenge of focusing on the fact that Hamas and the Palestinians and the terrorist structure that's there needs to be dismantled, that Israel does deserve and need a peaceful structure, that the Palestinians, regardless of where they are, pose a security threat, that there is no path to a two-state.
Yeah.
So that's just a straight up that's one of the most racist statements I've ever heard on TV. Palestinians, no matter where they are, pose a security threat. Again, the whole reason there's a security threat in the Middle East, the fundamental problem is because Israel, with U.S. support, denies self-determination to the Palestinian people. So that's a security threat to everybody, is Israel's denial of self-determination to Palestinians. Mike Turner is basically saying that because Palestinians exist, they're a security threat to Israel, which is just a profoundly bigoted statement. But it's consistent with Zionism, which sees the existence of the indigenous Palestinians as a threat to Israel, because Israel needs to take their place and expel them in order to exist as a Jewish supremacist state.
Yeah. I mean, I almost appreciate that he said that part out loud.
Well, it's certainly honest. It's certainly honest. And that is
about
what
how
U.S.
they
policy
see them.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to Mike Waltz. There is the whole Ukraine war still going on. Donald Trump promised to end that in 24 hours. That hasn't happened. So what's the plan now? Let's hear from Mike Waltz.
On the table this week, including the future of U.S. aid to Ukraine. We need to recoup those costs, and that is going to be a partnership with the Ukrainians in terms of their rare earths, their natural resources, and their oil and gas, and also buying ours. Those conversations are going to happen this week, and I think an underlying principle here is that the Europeans have to own this conflict going forward. President Trump is going to end it. And then in terms of security guarantees, that is squarely going to be with the Europeans.
We're way out of time, but who do you like for the Super Bowl tonight, Colonel?
Ha ha ha. Okay. So what he's basically saying there is that the U.S. plan for Ukraine now is like they're going to give us their rare earth minerals, as Donald Trump has talked about, and that's how they're going to pay for continued war funding. So is this Donald Trump's new plan? We're going to just loot Ukrainian resources to keep the war going. Is that how he plans to end the war? It's very different than what he talked about on the campaign trail when he said he'd have it done in 24 hours.
Right.
Now they're saying if they give us access to their minerals, we'll keep it going. So they can pay us back.
To their rare earths, as they're now all saying.
Yeah. And one problem is, as we've talked about, like the most valuable resources that Mike Waltz, Donald Trump want to get their hands on in Ukraine, it's currently controlled by Russia. So are we now going to like arm Ukraine more to get that territory back? I mean, who knows with these people? But that in public, let's hope maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. This is all just like posturing in public. But if this is really what the plan is, then we're in for a lot more war and the war for Ukraine's minerals, as Lindsey Graham has always wanted.
Right. Yeah, just like overt neocolonialism as opposed to subtle neocolonialism.
Okay, well, let's turn to USAID. The Donald Trump administration has been taking enacts the USAID cutting programs. And Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, has a lot to say about that.
The former administrator of USAID under George W. Bush called it a huge mistake, adding, quote, "This assistance is one of the most powerful tools Washington has to push back against Chinese and Russian influence and to prevent transnational threats such as disease and terrorism from reaching U.S. soil." Is America basically handing China and Russia an opportunity to expand their influence on the world stage?
Classic meet the depressed question.
Yeah.
Not like, hey, do you feel bad about all the people who will suffer by cutting their HIV medication and food aid? It's,
Right.
hey, is cutting food aid going to help Russia and China?
Right. That's really the metric that we should be caring about and looking at. Yep. How does this fit into our imperial hegemony plans?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, Kristen, this is exactly what President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, Elon Musk, myself, and many others who have worked with USAID are talking about. All too often, these missions and these programs.
When did Elon Musk work with USAID? I missed this. Like, Elon Musk is like a veteran now of USAID, so he has the authority just to cut it. I think they're engaging in some like mythology here about Elon Musk. Like when Elon Musk was volunteering in Africa, handing out food packages on the ground, like handing out mosquito nets, he developed some real invaluable experience that now gives him the authority to cut everything that he doesn't like.
Well, Aaron, he is an African American.
Yeah. To the point now where he's gotten Trump to like go after South Africa for daring to not be so friendly to white landowners. And, as Michael Tracy pointed out, I think another reason why Trump is going after South Africa is because South Africa stood up to the U.S. in opposing the genocide in Gaza. And there's got to be a revenge factor there for Trump's administration.
Yeah. I'm sure Miriam Adelson told him to do that.
I mean, to everyone's surprise, they brought Israel to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, for genocide. And that was a huge act of solidarity with Gaza.
Yeah.
This historic victim of apartheid standing up to the modern day apartheid state.
Right, exactly.
Defying the world's largest state, the most powerful state, the U.S. And I think, as Michael Tracy said, Trump is undoubtedly trying to punish South Africa for that.
Right. But can't you just imagine him being told in a meeting? Like, I feel like he didn't even pay attention to that. I could just imagine Miriam Adelson being like, they brought Israel to the ICJ. And they found that there was a plausible case for deniability, and Trump being like, really, they did that? Wow. Who knew? You're kidding. And then deciding to implement this revenge plan.
Are not in line with strategic U.S. interests, like pushing back on China. They're doing all kinds of other things that, frankly, aren't in line with strategic interests or the president's vision, number one. Number two, all too often, only cents on the dollar actually makes it to people in need between the big contractors, the subcontractors, the local contractors. The dollars aren't being used wisely. We need to take a hard look at it. We need to move quickly.
All right, he's making 2 points here. The latter one, that only cents of the dollar are going to aid, fair enough, actually. I can't argue with that. A lot of USAID money is a slush fund, like funding media operations and funding destabilization programs that overthrow countries, like in Ukraine. That definitely happened. But he's not giving that as a specific example, which says to me he doesn't really care about that. The first point, though, he says that that USAID spending is not in line with U.S. strategic interests. That sounds to me like USAID is not being imperial enough. So therefore, we have to take a look at it and get it to be even more hegemonic and imperial. I think that's what I'm hearing from Mike Waltz. And that's also what we're going to hear from our next voice, Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. Listen to what he says about USAID.
Yes, the USAID was a slush fund, first of all, for left-wing projects around the globe, like gender surgeries around the world, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, crazy Green New Deal climate scams, and every other lunatic left-wing project that is bankrupting this country. But even beyond that, it was funding an army of left-wing activists, these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, NGOs. They get billions and billions of dollars, and they use that money to then infiltrate corporate America, to then infiltrate the public sector, to then resettle, for example, at taxpayer expense, millions of illegal aliens into this country, to drive racist equity policies, to drive radical left gender policies. And so what we've learned is that the left's, this mammoth left-wing power structure, plus left-wing media, wasn't organic. It wasn't created naturally. It was funded by taxpayer dollars. And that is why they are screaming and screeching so loud now, is because President Trump is cutting off the slush fund to the organizations that hate and hurt America.
And he's...
Okay, well, I will agree with Stephen Miller on one thing. It is a slush fund. It has been used for nefarious causes, but not the woke left-wing causes he's talking about. They've actually been used to undermine leftist causes around the world. Like, for example, governments that don't want to be under the boot of the U.S., that want to develop their own economies, go their own course, or even maybe some of them socialist, like in Cuba and Venezuela. USAID has been used to destroy them. Like the U.S. Will spend through USAID a lot of money to destabilize governments like in Cuba and Venezuela and everywhere else. There's a government that wants to be outside the control of U.S. hegemony. And these people aren't talking about going after that. They're complaining that somehow USAID has supported left-wing causes, which has then come back to bite the U.S. by spreading DEI and woke politics. So it's a really inverted reality here. I mean, there is truth to the fact that the U.S. sometimes advances hegemony by funding so-called woke projects, but the aim there is not to advance like what they call wokeness. It's to actually use these issues to drive a wedge in societies that they can then exploit, and all that gets obscured here by Stephen Miller.
Yeah. It's like humanitarian camouflage.
100%. 100%. It happens all the time. And there's groups like the International Republican Institute, which is tied to the Republican Party, funded by Congress, works in concert with the USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy to destabilize foreign countries, even sometimes funding these so-called woke projects that Stephen Miller claims to oppose. There's an article recently in the Gray Zone about this, but that's being used to advance not wokeness but hegemony. And it doesn't sound to me like Stephen Miller and his colleagues care about that and are doing anything to curtail that. Maybe I think sometimes accidentally they are, like in Ukraine, they've cut off some funding, and some of those things have tied into the U.S. aim of controlling Ukraine. But to me, that's more incidental. It's not part of like an actual targeting of the U.S. regime change apparatus.
Well, and what we're seeing is both parties weaponizing kind of culture wars, turning this into a culture war issue to obscure what the U.S. government is really doing abroad. So if you're on the right, you get to say you're going after woke programs. If you're on the left, you get to say the point of this is that we're protecting people and from, authoritarian regimes. And neither one is being honest about what's really going on. So it serves both sides.
We have two good examples of that. First, we'll hear from a Republican senator, Senator Haggerty. And he is going to make the case for why USAID is all just woke gender stuff, and also actually supporting terrorism, of course. Senator Bill Haggerty.
I've asked them to be very clear about, for example, their role funding Hamas in Gaza. They would not comply. They will not tell us what they do. Now that we start to find out some of the programs that AID has been funding, if you think about it, sex change operations in Guatemala, LGBTQ programs in Serbia,
the U.S.
this is
government
ridiculous.
does not
this is
fund
so beyond
sex
the pale.
change operations or fund Hamas. You know that, though. But you sit on...
That is not true, Margaret. I couldn't get the Secretary of State. I asked him 3 times to tell me that we were not funding Hamas through AID. He couldn't do it. And frankly, what we found is that we've been funding as American taxpayers organizations.
Do you have any evidence that the United States government is funding a terrorist group?
Certainly, the funds that have gone to UNRWA. You saw the UNRWA members who were also Hamas members doing an attack on...
UNRWA is part of the United Nations.
UNRWA is supporting terrorist groups. And if you look at what UNRWA has done, it's been so counter to our national interest. It's unbelievable that we would fund it.
Okay.
So he goes from claiming that USAID is funding Hamas to very casually moving the goalposts and saying it's funding UNRWA, and saying out loud that UNRWA is a terrorist organization, when we know that's not true. And we know that because Israel made that claim, and it was such a dubious claim because it was based on like tortured confessions, that the countries, the governments that cut off funding for UNRWA reversed that decision. Not the United States, but European countries that stopped funding UNRWA because of Israeli allegations about Hamas infiltrating it reversed their decision. But he's shamelessly lying through his teeth.
It's so cynical. And, you know, at least he's being challenged somewhat on corporate TV.
Yeah.
Elsewhere, he'd just be allowed to spew that lie. So credit to Mark Brennan. But yeah, okay. So that's Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, Republican. Now let's hear the Democratic Party counterargument as to why USAID actually is a good thing. And again, as Katie, as you said before, the argument is not so much about like helping people. It's also about, in the case of Chris Murphy, because it weakens our enemies.
Right.
Do talk a little bit about USAID and how it works. It's a subsidy program. The taxpayer dollars pay farmers for soy or rice, and then those are donated, correct? How much of it is a subsidy?
This is actually a good question, but not for the reasons that Martha Raddatz indicates. What actually this means in many cases, like in Haiti, the U.S. will subsidize its own agricultural products like rice, dump them onto global South countries that can't afford to compete with subsidized U.S. agricultural products, and wipe out their entire industries, like in Haiti. USAID, under Bill Clinton, wiped out Haitian rice farming. And Bill Clinton actually famously apologized for this years later. It was a rare apology from Bill. And that's one of the problems with USAID. It's like it's a slush fund through which the U.S. can destroy foreign economies by subsidizing U.S. products that these countries can't compete with. And that's what happened in Haiti. Haitian, as Bill Clinton, he went before Congress. He said that because of me, Haitian rice farmers were wiped out, and he actually apologized. It was, of course, it was much too late, but that was a rare acknowledgement from Bill Clinton of what USAID really did.
Well, also he wanted to make sure that he could harm Haiti through the Clinton Foundation, so he had to like take some responsibility for that, so people would trust him for the other stuff. On the other stuff, yeah, they did that in Jamaica. There's a really great documentary called Life and Debt, and you actually see these Jamaican farmers just like pouring out milk because they can't use their own milk, and it's going to go bad.
And that is the really insidious side of USAID that no one discusses. So this idea, even that we're giving food to people, it obscures the fact that we're giving food to people that then destroys their food making capacity.
Right. But that's only part of the amazing stuff that Chris Murphy says. Let's listen to more of what he has to say.
Well, listen, most of what USAID is doing is employing Americans and often foreign nationals to try to prevent instability and conflict. They are also working to try to reduce the reasons why young people join terrorist groups overseas. They are chasing Chinese and Russian influence. I mean, listen, the major question of the next 50 years is who will control the piping of the international economy, the United States or China? It's USAID, not the U.S. military, that is working to try to blunt Chinese influence. So it's ultimately American and European rules that control the global economy, not Chinese rules. So USAID is out there protecting American jobs and American interests. And if you roll up USAID, it is just a massive gift to China in particular. And that is very bad for U.S. national security interests, very bad for the U.S. economy and U.S. workers.
So there he is answering the question that was asked by Welker a couple of segments ago, where she's basically like, isn't this going to be bad for good for our adversaries and bad for us? You know, this is all being framed as the war for a unipolar world.
And through the magic of the internet, I believe I found the clip of Bill Clinton apologizing for destroying Haitian rice farming. And It's worth hearing if you haven't heard it before. Here it is.
And relieve them of the burden of producing their own food. So thank goodness they can leap directly into the industrial era. It has not worked. It's maybe been good for some of my farmers in Arkansas, but it has not worked. It was a mistake. It was a mistake that I was a party to. I am not pointing the finger at anybody. I did that. I had to live every day with the consequences of the lost capacity to produce a rice crop in Haiti to feed those people because of what I did. Nobody else. We rich countries that produce a lot of food should sell it to poor countries.
So there you go. Bill Clinton took responsibility for that, and that
Wonder
was
what made him do that.
That was all USAID. So under the guise of development of aid, they destroyed Haitian rice farming.
Right. I do wonder what made him apologize for that. And there's obviously some cynical reason.
Well, I believe this was after the earthquake, and so and part of the problem, with the earthquake, because Bill Clinton destroyed Haitian rice farming, many people who used to live in rural areas on farms had moved to Port-au-Prince, to the city, and so the death toll was seen to be higher because of the density of some of the buildings that were destroyed in the earthquake. And so there was a sense that, like, because Haitian rice farmers were wiped out, there were more deaths in the earthquake because more people were living in Port-au-Prince, in the urban areas. But then with Bill Clinton, there's always some cynical motives. So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as we heard earlier,
we should revisit. I mean, I don't know if we sufficiently examined how significant what Chris Matthews said was, right? I mean, he really is admitting out loud that this is about our hegemony.
Chris Murphy.
So I want to thank him. Yeah. Did I not say Chris Murphy?
I heard Chris Matthews.
Sorry, Chris Murphy. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris Murphy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as we heard earlier, Elon Musk is going to be taking on the Pentagon. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, returning to his former home, Fox News, he claims that they're going to uncover hundreds of billions of dollars in wasteful spending.
Is the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who is about to embark on a week-long trip to Germany, Belgium, and Poland to engage with allied leaders on strengthening deterrence, as the Secretary is also committing to a clean audit of the Defense Department within 4 years. Secretary Hegseth, congratulations to you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about this upcoming look at the spending at the Defense Department. Should we expect hundreds of billions of dollars in wasteful spending there?
Unfortunately, I think so. And we very much, the president is right. He's setting the pace. And he is also correct that American taxpayers deserve to know exactly how and where their money is spent. The fact that I have to commit, Maria, to an audit being done in 4 years is bad enough. The Pentagon should be able to pass a budget right now. Thankfully, the Marine Corps has passed a clean audit for 2 years in a row, and I applaud them. But that needs to go across the entire department. So that will be a focus. Where we spend dollars, we need to know, when we spend dollars, we need to know where they're going and why. That's simple accounting, and that has not existed at the Defense Department. We're going to fix that. But that's not even DOGE. I mean, we welcome Elon Musk and DOGE coming into our department to help us identify additional ways in which we can streamline processes, fast-track acquisitions, cut waste, cut tail to put it to tooth. We know in a world where America's, $37 trillion in debt, resources will not be unlimited. So every dollar we can find that isn't being spent wisely is one we can put toward warfighters. So we welcome DOGE at DOD. We will partner with them, and it's long overdue. The Defense Department's got a huge budget, but it needs to be responsible.
All of this.
So he says all the waste we can identify can go towards the real goal, which is warfighters, right? So it sounds like he's not going to touch the already massive amounts that are spent on weaponry, including nuclear weapons, but go after, like expensive toilet seats and things that have previously attracted scrutiny.
Right.
I'm all for cutting the Pentagon budget, but why not go after all these machines of death that we spend so much money on, far surpassing everybody else? Yeah.
Because he likes them and he's part of that. Also, every single Secretary of Defense promises that they're going to go after waste and do an audit, and they never do. So he's not doing anything new. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But he is a former Fox News host saying it on Fox News, so they are going to treat this as some huge break from the past. Okay, well, to underscore the point that the Trump administration is very unlikely to really touch Pentagon spending, let's hear from Mike Johnson, the House Speaker. He has to put together a budget, and that budget will include the tax cuts, making those tax cuts that Trump passed the first time permanent. I would argue those tax cuts favored the wealthy. Others would disagree, but we can have that debate some other time. Mike Johnson is here to say, we're going to do these tax cuts. We're going to protect what he calls defense spending. And listen to what he says about Medicaid, because I think he makes a pretty significant comment.
More boxes to check, but we're getting very, very close.
So we know one of the president's priorities, and yours as well, is to extend those tax cuts that were passed in 2017. Here's what Axios says. Extending those for 10 years could cost $4.6 trillion under the current law scoring used by the Congressional Budget Office. So what is more likely? You find enough offsets in spending somewhere to get that number down, or this talk now that maybe those cuts only are extended 5 years?
Well, we're looking for the offsets, and we have to do that. We have to be good financial stewards, because the other concern is that we are growing the national debt. We don't want to add to the deficit by doing this. So it is a very expensive project. And remember, we've got to spend money to secure the border, because the Biden administration opened it wide. We've got to make sure defense spending is covered, and then no tax on tips and these other big priorities that the people elected the president to do. So making all that work in the proper equation is where the math and the hard work comes in. But we're going to make sure that we find the offsets to do this in a responsible manner.
So he doesn't talk there about going after defense spending. He, in fact, says defense spending has to be covered, which means the Pentagon budget remains the same or even increases, as Trump did the first time he was in office. He bragged about one of the largest Pentagon budget ever. So, but then we're going to hear him talk about Medicaid, and I think he makes a revealing comment.
Meantime, House Democrats say it looks like you're going it alone. They think this is going to be a party line vote, or at least if you can keep your caucus together, and that you're not actually spending any time negotiating with them. Here's the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries.
Republicans haven't said a single thing to House Democrats about finding common ground to get something done on the budget, on their tax cuts for the wealthy, well-off, and well-connected, on their efforts to dramatically end Medicaid as we know it, or on the debt ceiling.
So is it worthwhile to get some bipartisan effort? You've done that on some big things that you have gotten across the finish line, but he says you're not even talking.
Well, listen, Hakeem is a good colleague, but that hyperbole there is not helpful. I mean, we're not dramatically cutting Medicaid, and we're not doing all these things they accuse the Republicans of. We're trying to get the country back on track.
He says we're not dramatically cutting Medicaid, but dramatically is qualified. So you are cutting Medicaid. He's just saying not dramatically.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing there from Mike Johnson. We're not dramatically cutting Medicaid. Well, but are you cutting Medicaid at all? Because Medicaid is already arguably underfunded. And are you seriously going to go before the country and cut taxes for the wealthy while also cutting Medicaid? And if so, I think that's a real betrayal of their claims to support working people and America first and all that. So that to me seems like a significant admission that he's not even ruling out any cuts to Medicaid. He's just saying we're not going to dramatically cut Medicaid.
Right. Yeah. 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 That's a interesting use of language there.
All right. Well, that's Mike Johnson. Do we want to hear from Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary?
I say we go to clip 9. What do you think? Because we don't have time for both of them.
Okay, sure. Just one of the things we're not going to hear her talk about is them sending migrants to Guantanamo Bay, which is the Trump administration's a big part of the Trump administration's approach to immigration is to send people off to Guantanamo Bay, where they have even less rights than they already have. But let's hear from Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem on Elon Musk accessing the personal data of Americans.
Post is reporting that Musk and his Doge team have access to FEMA's sensitive disaster data, which includes personal information about tens of thousands of disaster victims. Have you authorized Elon Musk and his team to have access to Americans' personal data that is housed inside DHS?
Yeah, we're working with them at the president's direction to find what we can do to make our department much more efficient. So I think
yes,
it's
they have
important. This
access?
is essentially an audit of the federal government, which is very powerful and needs to have happen. That agency, and one of the things I've been very clear to the appropriators in the Senate and the House is please give me the authority to reprogram funds. There's
Right,
funds
but that's
that are
different
going.
from him having access to personal data that is housed
The
in
president has
DHS.
authorized him to have access.
And you
to
feel
that,
comfortable
so
with that?
absolutely.
I remember a time when
This is where it gets good.
Republicans were very careful about and worried about the government, particularly unelected people.
we can't trust our
having,
government anymore.
having access to
That's our
personal data.
Yeah. Oh,
But
absolutely.
you are the government.
Yes,
That's a great line. We can't trust the government anymore. Okay, but you are the government now.
So can we not trust you?
Yeah.
Is that what you're telling us? Should we not trust you? So therefore, should we dismiss everything you say?
Right. This person is so dumb. It's actually quite revealing because it's like what people would say without any media training and what people would say without trying to hide the truth at all. Let's keep watching a little bit more.
saying is that the American people now are saying that we have had our personal information shared and out
But
there
now
in the
Elon
public.
Musk has access to it.
Yeah, but
He just said
Elon
he
Musk
does.
is part of the administration that is helping us identify where we can find savings and what we can do. And he has gone through the processes to make sure that he has the authority
You're totally
the president has
comfortable with
granted
it.
him. I am today by the work that he's doing by identifying waste, fraud, and abuse. And his information that he has is looking at programs, not focusing on personal data and information.
Not focusing
Oh, great. I feel a lot better.
but he has access to it.
So he's not going to, that's almost like you shouldn't care about the government spying on you if you haven't done anything wrong. It's the same logic. He's not going to look at your personal information, just that stuff to slash. And by the way, this is illegal no matter what. I mean, regardless of his focus, this is illegal. And you think that, this is, I think, an example of Democrats really wasting and squandering their cred by kind of like manufacturing controversies and constitutional crises and claiming Trump is breaking the law. This is an example of something that actually is illegal and a big deal. But I think it's hard for them to actually bring that up because they've, kind of cried wolf. But it does violate like the Privacy Act of 1974.
I mean, I'm sorry to be a broken record, but again, maybe framing the president as a Russian agent and centering your resistance around that for years and years and years wasn't a very good idea strategically.
Yeah.
Just saying. Okay. Well, that's our Department of Homeland Security Secretary. Let's turn to what we were talking about before. Elon Musk deciding, you know what, let's get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. All it does is save consumers money from predatory actions by corporations and big banks. Let's get rid of that. RIP CFPB. And Bill Hagerty, Senator Bill Hagerty, who we've heard from already, he's cool with that.
Since you're on banking, the budget director announced he's notified the Federal Reserve that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau will no longer take congressional funding because it's not necessary. Elon Musk tweeted, "Rest in peace." Can you tell us, did the White House inform
Elon
the
Musk
bank?
tweet.
Yeah, did the White House inform the banking committee that it's being dismantled? What does CFPB rest in peace mean?
So I've had significant conversations with Russ Vought, who is our new OMB director. The CFPB has been out of control for some time. The way it's designed, I think, is unconstitutional. It has no oversight. It's been basically a reckless agency that's been allowed to go way beyond any mandate that I think was originally intended. So it's time to rein it in. And I'm applauding anything that we can do to bring more stability, more control to the federal government and take agencies like this back, back into some sort of sense of accountability and oversight.
So what does that mean? Because it's established.
Yes, that out of control Consumer Protection Bureau. Yes, it's running wild with all that protection of consumers. I'd love to know what they think is so out of control about that bureau. Again, to me, it was like a very weak response to a massive crime, which is the financial crisis, which was caused by Wall Street greed. And this was like Barack Obama throwing people like Elizabeth Warren a bone when he wouldn't crack down really in any serious way on the bank. So he did create this one agency that can protect consumers on a more, on a smaller scale. And it's worked. It saved people money. But now for Republicans, even that little bit of regulation and oversight goes way too far. It's out of control, running wild. It has to go.
Yeah. I mean, for billionaires like billionaire oligarchs like Elon Musk, obviously they're not fans of this bureau. And it is worth noting that the Supreme Court, a right-wing Supreme Court in 2024, voted that the funding was constitutional. And another point is, if we care about government waste, the total budget for the CFPB is $810.6 million. The total amount of weapons Trump just announced for Israel is $7 billion. So that would be an interesting thing to actually cut.
Yeah. Why is Elon Musk cutting all this money we're sending to Israel and spending on weapons that destroy Gaza and kill people? That apparently just can't be touched.
Yeah, that's
which
not
shows what a
wasteful or
joke. It just shows like what a joke this whole thing is. And again, if Democrats were serious about cutting wasteful spending, they could be opposing sending billions of dollars to Israel rather than doing the exact same thing.
Yeah,
it's very bleak. All right. Well, listen, let's close with some news from Mike Waltz, who we've heard from before. Trump has been talking more and more about annexing Canada. And so what's up with that?
And guys, we're going extra time. We're giving you extra time, so please like the stream.
Closed-door meeting with business leaders, outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned that President Trump is serious about annexing Canada to make it the 51st state. Is he right? Is President Trump serious about planning to annex Canada?
Look, I think the Canadian people many of them would love to join the United States with no tariffs, with lower taxes. And I have all kinds of neighbors down in Florida that are Canadians that are escaping many of the liberal policies and have moved in. But look, what we're talking.
Yes, wealthy, elderly Canadians who go summer in Florida. Yes.
Yeah.
Who go spend their summers in Florida, because admittedly, very cold, especially the east coast of Canada. Very, very cold. So fair enough. I don't blame anyone for going to Florida for the winter. But they don't represent people who can afford to go live in Florida for like 4 months out of the year. Don't represent the majority of Canadians. I can assure Mike Waltz of that as a Canadian.
Right. And also, they're not really persecuted because they're just snowbirding.
About what we're talking about.
But yes or no? First of all, I think some Canadians would disagree with you.
In the Western Hemisphere?
I think some Canadians would disagree with you. But just yes or no? Is he planning to annex
part
Canada?
Of his policy. Well, I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is.
Okay, well, that's some news. Okay, so we're not going to invade Canada. Okay, all right. At least no plans to right now. Who knows what can happen tomorrow? But yeah.
Nothing's off the table.
But he's not ruling out what Trump has floated, which is annexing Canada. So, again, as Michael Tracy pointed out, Trump didn't run on this. I don't recall him promising on the campaign trail to annex Canada. That's something he's trying to.
Or the Panama Canal,
or Gaza, That's just something he's kind of just put out there after taking office, and so it does sound like it's still on the table in the eyes of the Trump administration.
So amazing. How does she do this interview with a straight face, by the way?
Imagine telling Canadians, because you're now part of America, you don't have health care anymore. You have to buy it, this low grade health care from the insurance market. And sorry about that. But also, again, how will the Trump administration handle having millions of Canadian voters who aren't Republicans, who aren't on board with all this stuff? Have they thought that part through at least?
Well, maybe they won't give them voting rights.
Yeah, until they've proven their loyalty to America by buying MAGA hats and
they'll be second-class citizens until then. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's going to do it for Monday morning.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in, Katie. Anything you want to plug for the Katie Halper Show this week?
Oh yeah. Well, I want to thank all of our super chatters for their generosity, especially Wade Worth, who gave the most. So shout out to Wade Worth. And yes, I have a really exciting show tomorrow. So I have a scoop, an update about Luigi Mangione. I can't say too much about it, but that's going to happen. And then I also will have students from Columbia University who are suing Columbia University for being expelled. And these are obviously Columbia University students who protested around Palestine. And that's youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
On
so
Tuesday.
Tune in there. Tuesdays, yep.
All right. Well, our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show, keep us going, get bonus content. Thanks so much for watching Monday morning. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.